All right, so we are live. We're going to wait a couple of minutes just to give people an opportunity to join the conversation. This has been an interesting news day, and so I wanted to make sure that we connected with all of you who are looking to hear about what's next, given the news today, also how people can get involved with the campaign, if you haven't done so already. So as people come in, we will welcome you into the conversation. We're going to do just a brief overview from my end, and then I actually want to be able to take questions from the viewing audience. So this is designed to be a very interactive conversation. So we'll wait a couple of minutes. While you're waiting, you can go to the website, amaraenyia.com. It's AMARAENYIA.com to find out more information on platform issues, ideas, the things that we've been talking about with the campaign. You can also watch the amazing footage from our campaign launch event, where we had several hundred people in the room who, from all sides of the city, came together because they believe in a vision for a different kind of city and are ready to organize and to work for it. So again, we are waiting a couple of minutes. If you can share the video. I know a lot of people have questions. It's been a whirlwind day for many people. So this is an opportunity for you to ask your questions and get some answers. Today, this morning, I did the morning show on WVON. I also did an afternoon version of the morning show. Around 2 o'clock, I did the Ben Jarofsky show, radio show this afternoon. Also, WGN, several other media outlets, just giving a take on what's next, what happens for the city of Chicago, what happens for the campaign, and sort of what the next steps are for us. So I wanted to just connect with everyone on live to make sure that we ask critical questions, and right now we're just waiting for more people to come into the room. First question, are you going to run? I am running, so as you can see, the sign behind me, we did our official campaign launch on August 28th, which was last Tuesday. So almost exactly a week ago today, we were in a room at the Co-Prosperity Sphere with several hundred people from around the city who all came out. The energy was out of this world. It was really amazing to announce my candidacy. The speech itself is on our YouTube page. It is also on our website. So again, amaraenyia.com. You can get the speech, see some images from the launch. It was really awesome. We also have a newsletter that you can sign up for, so you can get updates on a weekly basis about what is happening with the campaign, updates, information, etc. So, hey Darius. I don't know if you guys are okay with me calling you out because I'm going to say hi, but I do want to thank all of the viewers that we have so far joining us in the space. So first question was, am I running? Yes. The answer is yes. Very excited, very energized. One of the things that stood out from the campaign launch is that we had so many people who came just on the basis of their enthusiasm and their energy and their believing in the mission and vision of the campaign, that this really is not just about one person looking for a job. This is about really reflecting and amplifying the voice of Chicagoans who are ready to move the city in the right direction. So the message definitely is resonating, and we're really excited. And I think that excitement was shared by all of the people that joined us last Tuesday, so exactly a week ago today, where we officially made our announcement. We're gonna wait for a few other people. Thank you. I love the idea of a Chicago City Bank. Yes, indeed, the public bank is one of the hallmarks of our economic platform. The irony is that the last time we ran, I was told we had too many ideas. Now we need ideas, so we're excited to put those things to use. Other questions, how can I get you to come to my church? Yes, so if you go to the website, you can actually submit an entire form that has all of the information about your event. It goes to our operations director who manages the calendar and will make sure that it gets placed on the calendar. So if you go to the website, amaraenyia.com, you can sign up, you can sign in and put all of your information about your event, your church, your forum, anything, and it comes directly to us. You can also send an email to ace1bookings@gmail.com, and we'll type all of this in the comment section so you'll have it to be able to use. What do you think of the many candidates who want to run besides you? Well, so what it tells us, having so many candidates who have already thrown their hats in the ring, is that there is definitely a desire for people to see some change in the city of Chicago. That there's a dissatisfaction, and that a lot of people think that they are positioned to move the city in the right direction. I think the good thing about our campaign is that we were never the anti-campaign. So the fact that the incumbent is no longer running doesn't really affect us very much. We were always the ideas and the solutions campaign. And so this just gives us even more space to really share our vision for Chicago. And the people will ultimately have to decide which candidate and which campaign most resonates with them. Just from what we've seen in the last week alone, we've seen a huge amount of enthusiasm and energy that really hasn't been seen in this mayoral election cycle to date. And so that is very telling, and we're planning to capitalize on that. I'm trying to see some of these other questions. If I missed a question, feel free to retype it so I can keep up with it. Jasminum, thank you very much. Good to see so many of you here. If you have key questions for us, feel free to ask. I do want to say a lot of questions that have come up about, well, what's the reason? Why all of a sudden is the incumbent not running again? And a lot of people have started naming different scandals, and you can pick an issue, any issue, and it's one of the reasons that's been given. But I want to lift up the organizers across the city that have been fighting on these issues, quite frankly, for the last several years. Those of you who've been in the fight, who know what has been happening, know that organizations have been pushing and pushing and pushing on these issues for years. So it's not just in these last few days that a scandal is all of a sudden going to be the reason. I always want to give credit to the people who've been putting in the blood, sweat, and tears on the ground in the communities on many of these issues, because they believe that things can be different. So I want to lift up all of the organizations, all of the grassroots organizations that have been putting in the work, because that work has come to fruition up to this point. And so I definitely want to lift them up as we think about why this decision happened, making sure that we give credit where credit is due. What are your thoughts concerning the city government and the public school system? Janelle, excellent question. Well, clearly government has not been working in favor of residents of Chicago, and that is one of the things that we talk about all the time, that we actually believe in government that represents the interests of the people of the city, and that it is possible to have a city that is equitable, where resources are allocated equitably, where you don't have entire communities that are neglected, where you have a strong small business sector, where you have access to a high quality school. The fact that there's such a level of inequity in the city is very telling, and it tells you the philosophy that has guided this city for so long. That philosophy has prioritized privatization. It has ignored broad swaths of the city, no clear economic agenda. And so we believe that there's a better way. And the question for the people of the city is, what is the kind of leadership that's necessary to bring us into the future? A lot of folks might ask, well, what on this issue of qualifications, and what does it take to lead the city, and what kind of background do you have that would qualify you to run a city as complex as Chicago? And I always say that the breadth and depth of the experience that I bring to the table is really one of the things that is the most qualified. So you will rarely find a person that has as broad experience as I have been able to attain over the last several years. I've worked at the top levels of government. Part of the reason why I ran for mayor the first time was after having worked in government, in the mayor's office, under the previous administration, the Daley administration, and really seeing up close the disconnect between those who make policy and those who are affected by policy. And so that really is one of the sense of urgency that I have about what needs to change. When you understand a system, you've seen it intimately, you also understand what needs to change within that system. So I've worked at the top level of government. I've managed a municipality. I work very much in the business sector, the small business sector. I've done everything from drafting local and state level legislation. I do economic development work, real estate development work that is always community driven and community based. My PhD is in education policy. I've been involved in education issues since I was in undergrad. at U of I in Urbana. And so the issues within CPS have long been at the forefront of a lot of my advocacy work. I do work in food security and housing, violence prevention. So you'd be hard-pressed to find an issue that I have not worked on, have not pushed legislation or drafted or gotten passed legislation on, or had tangible, actual on-the-ground experience on. And I've also, one of the things that is key is just having top government experience, but also very strong grassroots experience. And so someone who can be that bridge builder between those two worlds and really navigate them effectively, and who is interested in empowering communities and empowering people to make decisions for themselves. That's a key part of the reason why I do the work that I do. So, and I've also worked internationally. I have a lot of international experience in government, in different policy areas around the world. So when you think about a city as complex as Chicago, a global city, and what it takes to understand how to govern, you would definitely be hard-pressed to find anyone who has the breadth of experience that I have. And it's all about putting it to use to really move the city in the right direction. Love you too, Chaparral. Love you too. Thank you guys for the comments that are coming in. Feel free to ask any questions that you have. We're going to be here for about a half hour, so you have some time to think up some really good questions to ask, or burning questions that you've had about this process. Roberto Sepúlveda, is it true that you also habla español? Sí. Sí, yo puedo hablar español. Más o menos. Aprendí en la calle de Centroamérica a Sudamérica. So for those non-Spanish speaking viewers, I do speak Spanish fluently. I learned traveling in the streets of Central and South America. Also having a lot of relationships and dear friends who are in La Villita. So I spend a lot of time there with, I probably shouldn't be eating as much, but the eloteros. And in Little Village, in Pilsen, a lot of members of our team are in those communities. In Humboldt Park, again, real relationships in the community that are not based on a campaign, they're actually based on having worked with folks in these neighborhoods. So mi español está bien ahora, but always willing and ready to improve my languages. So if you're willing to help me, Roberto, I am definitely open. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate your comments. You are always so insightful. Yes, I just really appreciate it. And very challenging. It's good to challenge those who say they want to serve the public, and being willing to ask the questions, sometimes the tough questions, and really analyzing things. I really appreciate that. It might be some of it the nerd in me, but hey. Maurice Brown, don't live in the Chi, but you have my support. Definitely appreciate it. Even if you don't live in Chicago, you can support the campaign. Definitely by investing in the campaign, donating. The link to donating to the campaign is on the website, amaraenyia.com. This is an investment in Chicago's future. And so we need as much of that as possible. Also sharing, spreading the word in your networks. We see this not just as local, but as a national effort. Chicago sets the tone for politics and policy in this country. And so we are making a huge statement nationally with this campaign. And we also are very connected nationally. You start to see some of that as the weeks progress, that this is not just about Chicago. This is about connecting to a larger movement around what it takes to change cities across the country. So you can always support even if you don't live in Chicago. But you can only sign a petition if you live in Chicago. So I just have to put that out there. Ty Ellison, thank you. Thank you, appreciate the support. Again, spread the word, share this broadcast, also share other articles. There's been a lot of media over the last several days. So share the articles, share the broadcast, share all of the information about the campaign, the website, to help us get the word out. Someone just asked, how would you improve crime in Chicago? So I'm gonna say that question is, how would you reduce crime in Chicago? I have always talked about a comprehensive approach to crime, and usually we talk about violence, crime and violence reduction. The issue in Chicago is that whenever we talk about this issue of violence or crime, it is always done from the standpoint of policing. Well, policing is reactionary. Policing does not naturally reduce violence. In order to reduce violence, you have to address what I call the series of public policy failings that have created an environment where violence can manifest. And that is everything from the disparity in economic investment, that is the educational system, it has to do with housing, it has to do with the inability or unwillingness of the administration to create an environment for jobs. It is also, what we don't talk enough about is public health hazards, exposure to lead. On the far southeast side, residents are being exposed to manganese in the soil. They had major fights over exposure to pet coke. If you're down in Inglewood with the Norfolk Southern Expansion Project, which I was a part of that whole effort, where residents are exposed to diesel particulate, these things actually have a biological effect on brain development generally. So when we talk about violence, we can no longer afford to talk about it as simply a policing issue. Because when we talk about it in that way, all of the investments go to police infrastructure. And the big battle right now is how do we make sure that we're more equitably investing our resources to building things that build community and build individuals. And so I always talk about the need for a comprehensive violence reduction strategy, which means addressing all of those different public policy areas that I named and addressing those issues, because then you naturally bring violence down. You have to address the mentality that creates the violent mindset before it even becomes an action. And that also means investing, for example, in behavioral and mental health services. So in Chicago, because solving the issue of violence does not fall conveniently within a press cycle or an election cycle, this is why we never truly address the issue. But for me, it's always been about getting to the root causes of violence. What are your plans for economic development on the south and west side of Chicago? So this is a big issue for me. I do a lot of economic development work. I've spearheaded large-scale development projects really across the city. There's a few major projects that I've done that involve repurposing closed schools, creating an arts and culture campus, that it would be a significant economic development driver, a significant economic driver, not just for the city, but also for the western suburbs and bringing people to the city to patronize local commercial corridors. So again, my background, I work largely in the small business sector as well. I manage a chamber of commerce. I work at the state level drafting legislation to help the small business sector. I started the Institute for Cooperative Economics and Economic Innovation specifically because we need to diversify the economic ecosystem. We need to invest in creating more worker-owned cooperatives that build ownership, these things that build individual and community wealth that we're not really talking about enough, right? So these are the ideas that actually expand the economy, that create wealth, that attract people to stay here and to stay in their communities. So I've done a lot of that, founding the Institute, working to expand co-ops, talking a lot about this issue of land trusts and facilitating land ownership. Because again, it's not just about getting the minimum wage jobs, it's about how do you create individual and family wealth where people can stay in their communities, live in their communities, raise their families in our communities. And so economic investment also is about targeting investment in those areas of the city that have been ignored, because we have to have a more balanced approach. When you target investment in those other areas of the city, you actually create an environment where people feel that they can stay in their communities, there are jobs in those communities, and so we're not seeing this mass exodus that we're seeing in Chicago. So really understanding, again, what it means for, like, you have to know economic development, you have to know urban planning if you're going to manage the city effectively, and that's something that has been a large part of my background. I've worked in the advanced manufacturing sector, I've worked in workforce development, creating pipelines into the high value add sectors of the economy, and those are the sorts of things that I'll bring in leadership in the city of Chicago. So a question, would it be an advantage for Rahm Emanuel to endorse me? Well, you know, at this point, we have a vision for the city. Our vision for the city is philosophically the opposite of what the outgoing incumbent had for the city. But you never know. Perhaps he may have seen the light and realizes that we've been on the right track all along. I mean, that's completely up to him. What are your so Shanita is asking, what are the top three priorities walking into this new role? So a lot of times people ask, well, what's the one thing that you would do on day one? Because of how problematic things are right now, because of the hole that we're in right now, it is, I would argue, almost impossible to focus on one thing. For me, the top three, and I'll actually name four, things that need to be addressed is one, making sure that the city is fiscally solvent. This is addressing our fiscal challenges, addressing the pension, addressing this issue of revenue, and the supposed lack thereof that we've been told that there's no money in this city, and we know that to not be the case. I was co-author of a book called Chicago Isn't Broke, Funding the City We Deserve, and in that book we outline ways to save money and ways to generate revenue and ways to find money that's been hidden from us in the city budget. So we would employ all of those tactics to address the city's fiscal health. The second issue is around, again, economic investment and making sure that the city has an inclusive economy. And for me, that is about having a public bank. It is about making Chicago the #1 city in the country for worker-owned cooperatives and other innovative business models that build community wealth. It is about supporting the small business community, and it's about a workforce program and initiative that actually creates high-paying jobs for people who live in Chicago. So that is on the economy. The third is definitely education. Again, my background is in education policy. My PhD is in education policy. I've worked on this issue across the board. The key issue for Chicago is education equity and how can you have a school district that is fiscally solvent and that actually guarantees every child access to a quality education, not just those who can win the Hunger Games about getting into a selective enrollment school, but every child. That's a top priority. And then again, this issue of violence reduction. And again, that means investing in all of the things that build individuals and build communities. And so it is a comprehensive strategy. It is the hard work that previous administrations have not wanted to do because it's not convenient and it's not necessarily politically expedient, but that would be a top priority. Danny says, how would you handle the pending consent decree that is being negotiated with the city and Lisa Madigan? So the consent decree is necessary. Those of you who have been involved, like myself, in issues of police accountability for years know that the biggest issues have been with transparency and accountability. Pushback on even the mildest reforms has been a problem. The consent decree is necessary because it creates another layer of accountability to make sure that the reforms that have been outlined specifically in the Department of Justice report are actually implemented. And so there should never have been any resistance to the consent decree to begin with. But again, it's absolutely necessary if there's going to be any hope of rebuilding any kind of legitimacy for our public safety institutions. Christina said yes, with several exclamation points. Thank you, Christina. Keep the questions coming. I will, as more questions are coming in, talk about what this means for us, what this announcement today means for us. It actually doesn't mean very much in terms of how our strategy is rolling out. We have been committed for a very long time to organizing people on the ground, even before we announced. Again, we don't see the campaign as one person looking for a job. This is about how do we reflect what we've been hearing for years on the ground in communities. And so we've been organizing in all 50 wards. The crowds that we had at our launch as a testament to the relationships that we have and the reach that we have and the excitement that we have around the city. And so our strategy is still going to be what it is. We're actually out in the neighborhoods every single week, running, walking, trotting, talking to people, meeting with people. We do the work, and I'm thankful to have an awesome team of folks who are committed to doing the work. And if you want to join the team, you can always go to the website and sign up. We have many coordinators that are just waiting for your names to come in so that we can plug you in. Okay, so the question, are you going to seek support from progressive electoral organizations like Reclaim Chicago? I'm sure there are a few more that I can't see after the ellipses. So I've been involved in this progressive space for a very long time. It's a thing that I don't feel the need to have to really say it, because those who've been in that space already know we've been working together. And it's about looking at the track record. So on the many issues that I've been involved in, the many groups that I've either partnered with or worked with over the years, they've been largely in those spaces as well. And so it is really up to organizations to determine what they will do in this mayoral election, and to identify the person who has the longest and strongest track record of stances on the issue that are progressive. And so for me, I feel that the track record speaks for itself, and knowing other people in those spaces will let you know who is the best representative for those organizations. How do you feel on gun control and education? So I don't know, Maurice, if those are gun control and education together, or gun control and education as two separate issues. The city talks about gun control all the time, especially just because of the issue of gun violence. The laws that are on the books are there. Again, my stance is always focusing on the mindset where violence is a thing. It's a mindset before it's an action. And so if you want to reduce violence, whether gun violence or other forms of violence, it starts with addressing all of those issues that create circumstances where people will begin to manifest violent behavior. And so I say it all the time. I don't necessarily think that, when we talk about gun laws, offenders are not, necessarily thinking at the top of their minds, what is the number of years that I'll be incarcerated, whether I'm going to shoot this gun or not. I just don't believe that that's the thought process. What we can do as government is to create an environment where violent behavior is not even a thing, because we have addressed all of the areas of policy that break down to create individuals who might resort to violence. So again, that's public health, exposure to public health hazards, it's education, it's the economy and jobs, it is housing, it is access to basically stable living. If we do those things, then violence becomes less an issue. The same issues. Okay, so I kind of missed that last question. I'm not sure who typed that question, but if you can retype your question, we will answer them. I was talking earlier about what this means for us. Again, our strategy has always been centered on mobilizing people, and so we've been mobilizing people for quite some time. This is a very people-driven campaign, and you'll also notice that it feels different. There's an energy that we have with the people who have been involved, and again, it was evidenced at our launch where we had so many people there that are all excited and fired up about the campaign. So if you want to learn more, you can go to the website, Amara Enyia. If you want to book events, there's also a process there, and we've included the email where you can reach out in the comments section. Okay, so question, do you have any plans to eradicate homelessness for vets, cycling vets out of transitional housing, and the rest of the comments after the ellipses? So have had the privilege of really being very much attuned to this issue of homelessness. There are some, for those of you who are aware, we had situations up in Uptown where the current administration was essentially tearing down these tent cities, forcing people off of the area where they were inhabiting. And for me, housing is a human right. Housing is stability. Housing is access to jobs. It is access to work. Housing is a foundational feature that's necessary for people to have stable lives. So this issue of homelessness, especially across the board, has to be addressed. But for veterans, it's particularly necessary given what they've done and how they've served the country. So it is definitely one of our top issues. If you see anything in Chicago, you've seen, for me at least, anecdotally, it seems like there's been an uptick in homelessness. And so, again, it is tied to the loss of access to mental and behavioral health services. It is tied to folks who end up working 1 or 2 or 3 jobs and still not being able to sustain themselves and their families. It is tied to the lack of affordable housing in this city. So these are all the specific areas that we would address when we talk about this issue of homelessness. Other questions? I think we have a few more minutes. I wasn't really keeping time on the timer, but I think we've got a few more minutes to take your questions. Big announcements today, but for us, it's just continuing from a very good launch that we had last week, and we have folks out on the streets. If you see a T-shirt with that symbol and that name, they will be circulating petitions, so please sign the petition. And if you want to join our army of folks that we have who are all over the city, you can definitely join our team, and you can sign up to be a part of our team by going to the website and by going to our Facebook page. Okay, so Catherine asked a good question. As an African American running, how do you avoid the pigeonhole assumption of only being concerned? Oh, so I'm trying to see. Oh, so I'm gonna assume, because I can't get this, assume what the last part of that question is. So how do you avoid the assumption of only being concerned? So I'm guessing this is the pigeonhole question about how to avoid just being concerned with one group or another. From the beginning, we have always had a unifying message for the city. What I found, because I work all over the city, is that there's not a huge amount of difference between what folks in different neighborhoods want. So I've not met a person yet who says, well, I like my schools closed, or I like walking to school and dodging bullets, or I like not having access to a park. Whether you're in Roseland or Headwish or Lincoln Park or Austin or Humboldt Park, people generally want the same things. They want to be able to find a job close by where they can work and support themselves and their families. They want access to good schools. They don't want to have to scramble as soon as their child is born to try to get them into a selective enrollment high school. They want to know that their child can walk to a neighborhood school that's quality. They want access to parks and green space. They want access to restaurants and things where they can enjoy life. That doesn't change regardless of where you are in the city, but somehow we've been led to believe that folks in certain parts of the city are not deserving or somehow are not interested in those same things. And so for me, our message has always resonated across races, across ethnicities, across age groups, because it speaks to the things that all people want. And our campaign is very reflective of the diversity of this city. That what is good for the Latino community is good for Chicago. What's good for Black Chicago is good for all of Chicago. That there is no, that we can't be dividing ourselves because the things that we want are generally the same. And that message has always resonated. It's why our campaign has always been and felt very diverse and very much like the city as a whole. So I don't think that we'll have necessarily that issue of being pigeonholed. Thank you, Catherine. I'm glad I got the end of that question too, because I couldn't see the last few words. Okay, so additional questions. You guys, hard questions, if you like, if you dare. Christopher Parker, yes. Did you address the city pension debt just yet? So for those of you who don't know, I'm big on fiscal policy. I do fiscal policy, I do municipal policy, municipal financial policy, municipal finance. That's what I do. I do it around the country. I've done it for Chicago for many years. If we're talking about the pension debt, most recently I've spoken about the city's plan to float a $10 billion pension obligation bond and why this is not a great idea, primarily because it is essentially borrowing more money which will saddle future generations with additional debt. So the last election, we were led to believe that there was this magic solution to the city's finances, and what we found is that the solution was to borrow. This $10 billion pension obligation bond is just the latest tactic. Another thing that I'm just going to hint at, and we'll probably talk about it more in depth, is related to a new, essentially, entity that was created to securitize future revenue. So we are actually mortgaging off, essentially, future sales tax revenue from the city by issuing bonds that are backed by that sales tax revenue. What this means is that we're locking ourselves out from any future revenue from sales tax because we borrowed it today, and now our future sales tax revenue is going to go back to pay on what we borrowed. This is one of the latest gimmicks, schemes that has been put in place by the city to get around a junk bond rating, a very low credit rating by the credit rating agencies. And it is not a solution to our city's finances. What we have to do as a city, if we're going to address the pension issue, we have to have structural changes to how we operate. That also means revenue. We have to have a revenue generating mechanism for the city. We cannot continue to plug our budget on the backs of residents by raising fees, fines, and forfeitures that make quality of life unbearable here. So the things that I propose are the things that actually create and shore up our revenue and address those biggest fiscal challenges. That's why I talk about a public bank for Chicago. that is a revenue generating mechanism that could be transformative. It would save us billions of dollars on infrastructure projects. It would allow us to issue low interest loans that can help to support the small business sector. If we have a robust small business sector, that's revenue coming in from that sector that helps the city. We have to make sure that we're shoring up our population. Population loss affects our bottom line. We've lost, if we lose hundreds of thousands of residents, that's property tax revenue we're not getting. It is all sorts of revenue that our small businesses are not getting in commercial corridors. So when I talk about things like cooperative economic models and a public bank, and these are the things that actually address the core of our financial challenges and set us on the right track so that we're not just borrowing our way into the future. So real solutions to our pension obligations, structural reforms that will actually address the city's finances. These are the ideas that we bring to the table that are very practical, and we just have to have the will to do them, and this campaign has that. So I try not to get too wonky when we talk about the city's finances. I know sometimes folks' eyes glaze over, but it is actually an area that I'm very passionate about. And the city has some pretty significant fiscal challenges that need to be addressed by someone who knows that space very well. Kahari Andrews asked, how can TIF misuse be resolved? So TIF misuse can be addressed primarily, one, through transparency. We have to know how TIFs are being allocated, how TIFs are being used, number one, who's getting access to TIF dollars. Right now, that information is not readily available. I was part of the TIF Illumination Project years ago that was going around the city, this is with Tom Chesser, going around the city trying to educate people on how much money is in their TIFs, how the TIF dollars are being used. And to do that, it required going through hundreds of pages of PDFs to analyze city documents that were just kind of put on the web for us to sift through. With TIFs, transparency is key, because we have to know how those dollars are being used, who's getting access to them. It's also about accountability. How do we make sure that any entity that receives those public dollars, that there is a clawback mechanism if they do not adhere to the promises that were made when they were set to receive those public dollars. So those are the two big things with the TIFs. If we can maximize it, it has to be used for the original intent, which was to spur economic development in blighted communities. And we really have not done a good job of that. But it can be addressed, it can be resolved, and that's one of the areas that I have a lot of experience in. So how about, yes, thank you, Lisa. So I'm getting a question, I can't see the rest of it. How about World War II, Korea, and Vietnam vets that can't get access, they cannot get the health care that they need today, housing, and I can't see the rest of the question. But we talked a little bit earlier about this issue of housing, getting access to housing for veterans, the issue of homelessness for veterans, the access to health care, which is, one is protecting the health care, especially for public employees, but at the county level, making sure that folks have access to housing at the county level. So that's really a comprehensive problem, and something that really the Department of Veterans Affairs should be addressing at all levels. We do have relationships in that space who work very hard in that space that we can tap into that have a detailed policy plan for addressing all of the issues that are attended to veterans, veterans and veterans affairs. Okay, so other questions? I think we have a couple more minutes. So we will also be doing this regularly. One of the things that we want to do is make sure that people have a chance to really ask questions that they have, not just about myself, but about the issues in Chicago. For me, these are longstanding issues that, again, I've been working on for years. Many of the folks in the organizing communities around Chicago have been organizing on some of these issues for years. This election represents the culmination of all of those different fights. This is the opportunity to finally move the city in the right direction with the kind of visionary leadership that is powered by people, meaning this is about restoring the power of the people in government here in Chicago, and this is our chance. So if there are other, we have one, we have a latecomer question coming in, Marcus. How would you attract larger corporations to Chicago, or do we need to focus instead on? And I can't see the rest of your question. So what I would say is how we attract larger corporations to Chicago. Chicago is a major attraction point in and of itself. Why? Because we have the best transit access in the country. And the things that attract large corporations are knowing they have access to a high quality labor pool. This means that our education system has to be on point, and we have to have workforce initiatives that train people in those high value add sectors of the economy. Again, I worked in the advanced manufacturing sector. I've done workforce initiatives in IT, in STEM fields, etc. Large corporations will come here if they know that they can pull from our population a high quality labor force. So our responsibility is to make sure that we have an educational system that is top notch, not one that leaves entire groups of children behind, but one where everyone can have access to a high quality education. And when they graduate, they have a diploma, a set of skills, so that they can either go directly into the workforce, go to college, or find other ways of plugging into the economy. Reducing violence is a key factor. That is something that will hinder us from being able to attract large corporations. Again, that requires a comprehensive strategy that addresses the economy, it addresses housing, it addresses education, it addresses access to mental and behavioral health services, it addresses mitigating public health hazards. These are the things that reduce violence. And if we do that, it'll be easier to attract large corporations. Having a fiscally solvent city, meaning a city that can actually manage its financial affairs, is a way to build trust and legitimacy for large corporations to locate here. So getting our financial house in order. This means structural reforms to make sure that we're not borrowing our way into the future. This means revenue generating. So again, the ideas that I talk about with the public bank, with cooperative economic models, with things that build individual, family, and community wealth, those things create stability that is attractive to large corporations. What the city of Chicago needs to do is to be a leader. We actually need to set the tone for what it looks like to attract corporations, not just by throwing together billion-dollar incentive packages, because a lot of times you're keeping the city from getting future revenue by giving away these incentive packages that large corporations sometimes don't even need. If we address all of these things that make the city of Chicago attractive, then we can actually set the tone for the kinds of corporations that we want to attract here. And it won't require us to basically try to give everything away just in the hopes that one of those corporations will locate here. The city of Chicago should be setting the tone nationally. We have everything that we need to make sure that we are a very attractive place for large corporations and for their revenue. All right, so I think that is the last question that we will take. Again, we will do this regularly. Y'all had some good questions. If you have additional questions, we will definitely be addressing them. So we'll give you a heads up when you can tune in for the next live. We wanted to make sure that we address the big news of the day, but also just to show everyone what that means for us, how our strategy is moving forward, regardless of today's announcement, how you can get involved. Again, you can go to amaraenyia.com. You can sign up to become a part of our team. We have an awesome team. You can also volunteer to help us collect signatures. We have an army across the city that is actually doing that right now. So if you see a t-shirt with that symbol on it and that name, sign their petition, and also make sure you sign up to join the team. Invest in this campaign. Investing in this campaign is investing in the future of Chicago. We are the campaign of ideas. We are the campaign of actual solutions. We are the campaign that's willing to do the work, that's been doing the work for years before this moment, and we will continue to do the work after. At every opportunity you get, spread the word, share this video, share the other videos and content we'll have on our website and on all of our social media. Every week we're in a different neighborhood, literally running through the neighborhood. The next one coming up will be in Rogers Park. I want to give kudos to the folks who joined us in Back of the Yards Coffee House. Thank you so much for the hospitality. Inglewood, we had representation when we were in Inglewood. We've been in Pilsen, Hyde Park. The Men Run These Streets group down in Hyde Park that actually ran with us. You guys are awesome. We were in South Loop. We were last week down in Hegwish at Club 81-2 with a great group of environmental activists down on the far southeast side of the city. So every week we're out in these neighborhoods, we're out on the streets. We'll be collecting signatures, but we're also just meeting people and organizing. So join the team, go to the website, like the page, share it with your friends and friends, neighbors, and in your networks, and we will give you a heads up when I'll be back on answering all the great questions that you have and hopefully mobilizing all of you to get involved because this is our opportunity. So with that said, thank you for joining me for these few minutes. Share the broadcast, and I'll see you soon.